In episode 8, we get a look at what happened to the Hill house after the storm. The Cranes have hired a bunch of people to start cleaning up, but also working on the house. And Steven goes downstairs to find his mother just talking to the twins' 2 empty beds, saying, "Of course you're safe." Steven snaps her out of this dream state, but immediately she starts asking where the twins are. And Steven lets her know that they're downstairs, but Steven is worried about his mom, even though she's reassuring him that she's alright. So later that day, as Steven's playing video games in his video game room, he finds an old vanity that he decides he wants to clean up for his mom to kind of cheer her up a little bit. So he goes to Mrs. Dudley and asks if she knows where paint is because his dad is too busy to help him out. And not only does she know where the paint is, she also knows who this vanity belongs to. It belonged to a woman named Poppy who was married to William Hill. And that's the guy who bricked himself up into the basement. And Poppy and William met in an insane asylum, and she was crazy all throughout her life. And Mrs. Dudley actually knew her, but it was much later in Poppy's life. So she tells all this to Steven, but also says if you want this to be a surprise, you should probably work on it someplace not in your room. So he takes it to the video game room and starts painting it, but when he gets down underneath it, it looks like that black mold from the basement has spread onto this vanity. Either way, he paints it up, makes it look really nice, and surprises his mom with it, and his mom loves it. But all of a sudden, she stares into the mirror and then just punches it out of nowhere. Now, she immediately apologizes for this, but it definitely freaks Steven out. But we fast forward to present day where Shirley has just learned that her credit card is gone, and Theodora just learned that her car has been stolen. So Shirley is on the phone with the credit card company, and they're going to let her know if the card is used or not. And Steven decides that he'll head off to try to find Luke because he knows where addicts try to score in the area. And Hugh decides that it would be good if he went off with Steven, but before he does, Theodora stops him and says, "Are we really not going to tell them what we saw?" And the answer is no. Hugh has no plans on telling them that he just saw the ghost of his dead wife go after them. So Hugh gets in the car with Steven, even though Steven doesn't really want him to. And because it's a long car ride, Hugh's just trying to make conversation, and he asks Steven about his marriage, which Steven thinks is uncalled for. And Hugh tells a story that he and Olivia actually split up for 1 week when Steven was 1. Hugh says it was the stupidest mistake of his life, and he went back, and Olivia accepted him, and ever since then, they were on the same team. And even when they fought, they were still on the same team. They just fought with love. And it's so important to just fight with love if you're going to fight at all. And he tells Steven that he hopes he can go and rekindle this relationship and find what they found. So after that conversation, another conversation starts up, but it leads into a fight. And Steven reminds Hugh that he didn't have to come. And Hugh says, "I absolutely had to come because I can't bear losing another one of my children. You'll get that someday when you have kids." And Steven says, "I'm never having kids." And Hugh responds with, "That's a shame because having you kids was the best thing in my life." And Steven responds with a low blow of, "Don't you mean Aunt Janet's life? Because she raised us." And at the same time, they both say Hugh's famous line, "Everything I did was to protect you kids." And then Steven says, "Yeah, but what about keeping mom safe? I read the police report. She had a cracked skull, a twisted ankle. There was blood all over the place, and there were bruises on her arms because somebody grabbed her so hard. She was depressed out of her mind. She was unmedicated. She was untreated, and she was left behind. So you decided to throw us in a car, you left her there alone, and then she threw herself off that balcony and died." And Hugh admits that she shouldn't have been left alone in that house, but Steven doesn't want to hear how this is the house's fault. He just simply thinks that this was a mental illness and she was sick. This conversation ends with both of the Crane men admitting that they really just missed Olivia. So while those two drive around having awkward conversations, since it's Halloween, Shirley's husband has taken the kids out, and he really wants to talk to her, but she says, "No, you're heading to the hotel after this." She also doesn't want to see trick-or-treaters at all, so she tells them to turn off the porch light. So after they leave, she's sitting there cleaning up the model home, and she notices that there are these specks on the inside of it. And those specks are the same specks that were under the vanity and the same specks that we're led to believe is black mold in the basement. But she doesn't really have time to think about it because all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. And when she answers it, there's nobody there. And this happens again, where there's a knock at the door, she answers and no one's there. But as soon as the door closes, there's another knock on the door. As Shirley comes back inside though, once again she's greeted by that guy who's just raising a drink to her. But he quickly disappears. And shortly after that, somebody once again rings the doorbell, and this time she's had enough. So she goes outside yelling, "What the fuck do you want?" And she doesn't see that Theodora is standing right behind her. Now, Theodora didn't ring the doorbell. She just simply showed up to apologize. But Shirley doesn't want to hear any of it. And Theodora's trying to explain what happened that night. How she was extremely drunk and the lights went out. And Kevin actually pushed her away. And this isn't his fault at all. But all Shirley can concentrate on is Theodora leaving her guest house. And Theodora shoots back, "You just love shoving your guest house in my face. You know why I stay in your guest house? I choose to stay there because you're such a cold person that I feel like if I'm there, maybe it'll warm you up a little bit." But Shirley is incapable incapable of listening to any reason whatsoever. And all Theodora wants to do is let her know that this wasn't her husband's fault. And this fight actually turns physical at one point, but when Shirley goes to kick Theodora out of her house, there's another knock on the door. And the knocking continues, but now there's knocking on the windows as well, and both of them are freaked out. The knocking finally stops, and Shirley gets a phone call from her credit card company that the credit card has been pinged. So she calls her brother and her dad and lets them know that the credit card has been pinged at a gas station, but the issue is that that gas station is on the way to the Hill House, and everybody knows it. So Steven and Hugh head to the gas station, but Hugh tells the girls to stay put, although they don't listen. And the fear is that Luke is going to kill himself, because twins usually have a hard time when one of them dies. But when Hugh goes into the gas station, he finds out that Luke isn't trying to kill himself. He's trying to burn the house down, because Luke filled up 6 gas cans worth of gas. So at this point, Hugh gets behind the wheel and races towards the Hill House. So during this car ride, Steven's saying how the family has a disease, and he saw that crazy look in his mom's eyes, and he saw it in Luke's eyes when he would draw these weird things in his treehouse. And he saw that look in Nell's eyes as well. And Hugh says, wait, you're not going to have kids because you're scared they're going to come down with this quote-unquote sickness? And Steven says, well, I know I'm not having kids because I had a vasectomy when I was 21. And even though his wife wanted to have kids, he could just never find a good time to tell her about this. And his wife's quest to have kids got so deep that they were meeting with fertility doctors. And finally, Steven had to come clean, and that's why they're separated. But Hugh is now racing towards the Hill House, and Steven tells him to slow down, but he says, no, I can't because Luke is now in more danger than he's ever been. And Steven says, did you not listen to anything I just said? And Hugh says, no, I did, but now you'll listen to me. Our family is like an unfinished meal to that house, and your brother is walking right back into it. And out of all of us, you in particular should never go in that house because of what you wrote in your book. And it's amazing because you think you know what you saw, but I know you saw a ghost. And Hugh brings up the vanity that he painted for his mom, and Steven says, no, that was a manic attack by a depressed woman. And he says, no, before that. Think about what you wrote before that. You passed by a guy with a handlebar mustache and old clothes fixing a clock. I know what clock you're talking about, and I had that clock looked at, but I never once paid anybody to come in and fix that clock. That clock was so old that only a particular set of people could even fix that clock, and they would take that clock off site. Under no circumstance was anybody brought in to actually fix that clock. I never hired that guy. That guy was a ghost. Of course, Steven scoffs this off and he says, well, what about the tree house? I never built you kids a tree house. That house was to be flipped. Where would I even have gotten the time to build you guys a tree house? Steven yells, Luke was in there all the time, but Hugh shoots back, that house was never there. When we get there, you can have a look, but I'll tell you right now, your mother was never crazy. Neither was your brother, and neither are you. But that house is dangerous, and that's why I told your sisters to stay put. But unfortunately, the girls are right behind them. And a fight also breaks out between the two of them after Shirley says, all right, try again. Try to tell me about what happened, but she can't take it. And as a mini fight breaks out because Theodora is once again trying to tell Shirley what happened that night, all of a sudden, Nell's ghost shoots out from the back seat and screams. And this forces the car off the road and Theodora to flee crying because she's having a breakdown explaining that she touched Nell's body, and when she did, she felt nothing at all. And she knows that Shirley knows that she has this power. So feeling nothing is a pretty big deal, and she continued to feel nothing for a couple days. And when she was down in that basement, the lights go out, and she feels nothing, and now she can't see anything. And while she feels terrible about what happened, she's glad that she did it, because when she did it, she felt terrible. She finally felt something. And now she's scared because she just lost her one sister, and she doesn't want to lose the only remaining one that she has. So it seems like Shirley has forgiven Theodora because the two get up, get back in the car, and head off into the Hill House, where Luke has arrived and he's spreading gasoline all over the place. And when he goes to light it, it seems to ignite at first, but then all of a sudden it just goes out. And Luke is very puzzled by this, but then he looks up, and at the top of the staircase, he sees his mother gesturing for him to come in. And as he's staring at his mother making this gesture, out of nowhere, the ghost of Poppy just grabs him. Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason.